guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I'm going to be talking about my best books of 2021. You have heard me say multiple times now that I did not have a great reading year in 2021. I think I had maybe 25-star reads in total. Could have been less than that. It could have been 18 or 19 out of 118 books I think I read. So to have read 100 books and them not be spectacular is not the best feeling. But I truly don't know what it is. It could be just that I have read a lot and I do read a lot, so I'm a lot pickier about my 5 stars now. Or it could be that maybe I'm not picking up the right books. There was a lot of mediocrity throughout 2021, but I did find as well that one of the reasons why I struggled so much to make this list is that a lot of the 5 stars that I gave were very predictable for me. An example of this is that I read multiple Robin Hobb and Brandon Sanderson books throughout the year, and I gave multiple Robin Hobb and Brandon Sanderson books 5 stars. If I'm struggling, I do allow multiple books by the same author onto my best books of the year, but I don't allow multiple books in the same series. So there's instances where I've read a series, given nearly every book 5 stars, but I can only pick one of those to come into my best books of the year list. So I actually, this is real bad, I have 6, maybe 7, depending on how you look at it, best books of 2021. Normally I also make a video of the most surprising books of the year. I've decided not to do that this year, but I have added 3 honorable mentions to my list of 6 best books. One of them did not get a full 5 stars, therefore I don't feel like it should be a favorite, but I can't stop thinking about it and I'm really excited to continue the series. The other 2 I did give 5 stars to, but they don't give me, I just know, you know, when a book's going to be my favorite. And while I loved these and they were really good, they didn't give me the same feeling as like the top books on this listed. This video is going to be in order, so we are going to be counting up from the honorable mentions in 9th, 8th and 7th place all the way up to my best book of the year. So let us get started with that 4-star read that I can't stop thinking about, which is Guild by Raven Kennedy. This is the first book in the Pleated Prisoner series, and it is an indie fantasy romance, which is one of my favorite genres. There are fae in this book as well. I can't say at the minute if it's a fae romance because I'm not sure to what degree the fae are going to be in this book, but there are fae in this world. And this follows a main character who is made entirely of gold. She's like King Midas's favorite pet, and she herself has been gold touched, so he keeps her in this gilded cage in his palace. Now this is a King Midas retelling, and the reason why I loved this so much and why I can't stop thinking about it is that when you say something's a retelling of something, so if I tell you a book is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, you are automatically going to have a set of assumptions about how that is going to play out based on your knowledge of Beauty and the Beast and also other reimaginings and retellings of Beauty and the Beast. So I went into this thinking this book was going to be a certain way, and still at the end of this book, having read it, I cannot tell you whether it is going to play out in that certain way that I assumed it would. But there's a lot of suspicious behavior from some of the characters in here that as soon as I started it, I was like, hang on a minute, like, is this the love interest? Is this what we're going with here? And a whole ton of spanners were thrown into the works. I really like this as well because I like my fantasy romance, I guess Sarah J Maas style, where you have really compelling romances but also with really compelling and detailed fantasy plots as well, and this book also delivered on that. So I think that this series has potential to be one of my favorite fantasy romance series ever. The only reason I gave it 4 stars is that it's pretty much set up, so there was a little bit of like a slow pacing throughout here, but I definitely think that the sequels are going to build upon that. I've heard amazing things about the 2nd and 3rd books in this series as well, and when I do read them I will be making a spoiler vlog on those 2 books and then assumedly the last one when that's released. And if you guys are fans of Raven Kennedy, then stay tuned on my channel. That's all I can say right now, but stay tuned. The second honorable mention, which was a 5-star read, is Desperate Measures by Katie Robert. This one is an indie BDSM romance, or it's essentially erotica, and the Wicked Villain series is a series of Disney retellings where the heroine falls in love with the villain instead of the hero. There are sometimes the hero or heroine, like the traditional love interest, is sometimes in the story as well, but these books mainly focus on the villains. So I've read the first 4 books in this series, and the first one and the 4th one are my favorites, and I don't know whether I prefer the first one because this, when I went into this I was a little bit nervous because I'd never read BDSM erotica before. I'd never really read erotica since 50 Shades of Grey when I was like 18, and this is an Aladdin retelling, so the romance in here is between Jafar and Jasmine. I don't like Jafar as a villain, he really creeps me out, and it also has daddy kink in here as well, which is something else that I don't like. So when this has been my only 5-star in the series so far, I'm unsure whether it's because of this book specifically or just because this type of book was completely new to me and I was blown away by that. Katie Robert writes such good smut, like the best smut that I have ever read, and so I feel like even though typically I don't like Jafar, even though I don't like daddy kink, this one was still a hit with me. And while these are Disney retellings, they're not fantastical, so instead of the like more magical plot lines of the movies, there is a city called Carver City and all of the villains are territory bosses. So in this one, Jafar has overthrown Jasmine's father to take over his territory, and in doing so he also claims Jasmine. This one also has consensual non-consent roleplay in it as well. At number 7 we have another romance. This one is a standard adult contemporary romance, and that is the Xhex by Errand. Now I say that this is a standard adult contemporary romance. It does have a little bit of witchy magic in here, but it is kind of in the style of something like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, where it's more of a contemporary story with a little, just a little bit of witchiness. So I wouldn't call it a fantasy romance necessarily, but it does have a little bit of magic in there. I think if you do typically read contemporary, you don't read fantasy, you will still enjoy this, because while the magic in here is super relevant to the plot, it's definitely the romance and the contemporary romance vibes that are at the forefront in here. But in this one we are following a young woman who is a witch, and I think it's about 8 or 9 years prior to the start of this story, she had a fling with a guy who was part of the founding family of this like witchy magical town that she lives in, and their relationship ended badly when he returned home to Wales to fulfill some family obligations. So when she was drunk and heartbroken, she cursed this guy with a Bath and Body Works candle, and she didn't think anything of it because she did not intend for it to be real witchcraft at all, and she thinks that all is well and nothing really came of it, up until the guy returns to the town to recharge the ley lines, and it turns out that Vivi's spell may have worked a little better than she actually intended it to. So something that I did really love about this is how it is like a contemporary romance with just a sprinkle of magic. It's like the perfect Halloween vibe, because it gives me the same vibes as those feel-good Halloween movies that I enjoyed as a kid, like Halloween Town and things like that. I also thought that the chemistry between the characters in here was phenomenal, and even though this book is by an American author, the love interest in here is Welsh, and while I can't speak for Welsh representation specifically, I will say that I think that this was a very good portrayal of a British love interest in the character's mannerisms and the way that he spoke and things like that. I think that this book delivered on everything that it set out to do, and it delivered on everything that I expected from it. For that reason, it got like a perfect 5 stars. Not the most phenomenal thing, because it's just like, you know, a light fun read, but if you're looking for a light fun romance, especially around the spooky season, definitely I think that this is the perfect one to pick up. Now moving on to my actual best books of the year. Coming in at number 6 we have Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This one is the final book in the Mistborn trilogy. I think that the first book, The Final Empire, was that my favorite book of last year? Oh no, Crescent City would have been my favorite book of 2020, but The Final Empire might have come in second. But this is the only series finale I think that Brandon Sanderson has written in the Cosmere so far, so I truly didn't know what to expect from it. But the Mistborn series follows this guy called Kelsier who is trying to overthrow the Dark Lord, who is the ruler of the Final Empire. The premise of Mistborn is what would happen if the Dark Lord won. So 1,000 years prior to the start of this story, there was a great hero who was prophesied to do this amazing thing, and he was overthrown by the villain, and the villain took power and is still in power today. The magic system in this one, I'm sure you guys have all heard about. It's based on metals, and you can ingest metals and harness the power of that metal. Most people who have this ability could only harness the power of one metal, and if you can harness them all, then you are Mistborn. So Kelsier himself is a Mistborn, and at the beginning of the Final Empire he recruits another Mistborn onto his team called Vin. So I really love this series. My favorite book in the series is actually the first book, The Final Empire, and I think the reason for that is that that has a heist plotline, whereas the second second two books in this series take a little bit of a different turn, and they start to follow a more traditional end goal of an epic fantasy series. And the thing that I really loved about The Final Empire is that it was a heist in an epic high fantasy setting. The Mistborn series kind of has a modern feel to it. If I had to place it into a real world time period, I put it at somewhere between the 1930s and the 1950s. So they don't have technology, they don't really use guns or anything, but they dress kind of like how the working class dressed in that time period, especially in the UK where we had like a lot of mining towns and things like that. So it had this like real feel of like the working class overthrowing the nobility throughout that first book, which does continue into the later books. It's just I thought that heist plotline was a little bit more compelling than a similar kind of plotline that I'd read in multiple series before. I heard that this was the best series ending that people had ever read, and I do think that this is a really good series ending. It kind of ties everything up really well, and it's a very final ending, which I like, because when a series ends, I want it to end. I don't want any room for speculation in here, and this definitely delivered like a very final ending to the series. But it's not one of my favorite Sanderson books that I've ever read. There is going to be another Brandon Sanderson book on here that is one of my favorite Sanderson books I've ever read, and I don't know whether that is because I just prefer the heist plotline of the first book to where the series ends up going, or whether it's because I've read a lot more from Sanderson and there are other books that I prefer. That being said, I still loved it. I love the characters in here. I love, especially in this series, how Brandon Sanderson writes really cinematic fight scenes. Just not as high as I expected it to be. Like, I thought that this was going to be like way up at the top of my list, and it didn't quite make it. At number 5, we have my favorite Hob book of the year, which is Fool's Errand. This one is the first book in the Tawny Man series, which is the third trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings as a whole. So this is the second Fitz trilogy, and way back in the first book in the realm of the Elderlings, we are following this very young boy called Fitz, who is the bastard son of Prince Chivalry, who is the king in waiting. Fitz's maternal grandfather washes his hands of him and sends him back to his father, Prince Chivalry, and when Chivalry finds out that Fitz is on his way, he abdicates the throne in shame and moves to the countryside. This leaves Fitz being raised by Chivalry's right-hand man and the stable master of the keep, Boric, up until he comes of an age where the king starts to take an interest in him and starts to train him to be a royal assassin. So the first trilogy is mainly about the politics of the court and the Six Duchies, which is the area of the world that we're in the Fitz books. And the second trilogy starts to look into some of the magic systems a little bit more closely, and also the politics of the people that belong to these magical groups. Fool's Errand, while it is the 5th book on this list, is not a perfect book at all. As far as I'm aware, Robin Hobb did not know the scope of the realm of the Elderlings when she started writing it, and every time she finishes a trilogy, she comes back like a few years later and is like, yeah, okay, I'll write another trilogy in this world, but they're not planned ahead of time the way that Sanderson plans his years in advance. And I think it definitely shows with this book, because throughout the beginning, you can tell that it's just bridging the gap between the end of the Farseer trilogy and what this trilogy is going to be about. It reacquaints some of the characters, it fills in the gaps of what has happened in the 15 years between the two trilogies, and it introduces a plot line that kind of disappears as we go into books 2 and 3 of this trilogy, which follow an epic quest for the crown. But the reason why I loved this, and the reason why I love Robin Hobb, is that her stories are very character driven. They're also very miserable. You all have heard of the pain parties, which is what we call the reading sessions we occasionally do for Elderling Long. And Michael from Average Reader coined a term recently. I saw it on Twitter that is so relatable. It's called the Hobb Sob, which is what you do when you're reading Robin Hobb's books. So Robin Hobb writes emotion really well. She writes characters that you really love and feel for, but are also deeply flawed. Like, Fitz is not the best guy a lot of the time. He can be a bit of an asshole, but you still feel for him because he has had this terrible life. She's not afraid to write trauma, she's not afraid to write torture, and she really puts her characters through it. She also writes the recuperation from these events really well. Things like PTSD, depression, and the injuries that her characters suffer really make a lasting impression on them that doesn't just like magically go away as the story goes on. I sobbed reading this book. I hobsobbed. I hobsobbed so hard. There is a vlog if you want to watch the extent of my sobbing. It was one of those where like I cried a bit and then I cried a bit more and then I thought I was okay and then I went into the next room and I cried a bit more. From the beginning of this book, you know that this event is coming because you just feel it in your bones, and you know, and it gets progressively more likely that this thing is going to occur throughout the book. But the way that the thing actually happened was just so beautifully written that there is no amount of preparation you can do for the event actually happening, and I loved it. If a book can make me cry, if I can be that invested in a book and the characters that I can sob to that degree, then it's automatically going to be one of my favorite books, because it's rare that a book can impact me in that way. Coming in at number 4, we have an adult contemporary romance, which is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is an adult romance series where every book follows a different one of the Brown sisters. I read the entire trilogy this year and I was very torn between the first book, Get a Life Chloe Brown, and the second book, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, for which one was going to make this list, but Danny won out in the end. So this one specifically is about Danny. She doesn't have time for relationships, she doesn't really believe in commitment, and we have a security guard at the university where she works called Zafia, who is in love with Danny blatantly. Like, he's checking her out all the time, he wants to ask her out, but he knows that she doesn't do relationships. One day there is a drill in the university building and Danny gets stuck in a lift because she doesn't know that it's a drill, and the lift gets stuck, so she thinks that the building's actually on fire and she's panicking, and Zaf rescues her. Like, he opens up the lift, finds out that she's pretty much having a breakdown inside of it, and carries her out. Loads of the students take videos of this and post it to Twitter, and they start going viral under the hashtag Dr. Rugby, as Zaf is an ex-rugby player. So the majority of people I've spoken to all have a different favorite book in this series, and I said when I did my worst books of the year, because I had one of the books in the series on as a disappointment, I truly believe that your enjoyment and your preference over the series depends on which sister you relate to the most. I do have to say that out of the 3, I think I relate to Chloe the most as a character, but I do relate to Danny a little bit as well, and it was the chemistry between her and Zaf that really sold me in this one. Aside from that, like, Zaf is a rugby player, which like is exactly my type. You wouldn't think it, but it is. I grew up in Wigan, which is a rugby town, so rugby players are my jam. And one of my favorite things about this series is that it's just so funny. Like, one of my favorite series of all time, my favorite series from childhood, is the Confessions of Georgia Nicholson series by Louise Renison, and if you enjoy those books and the humor in those books, which are the funniest books I've ever read, I think, then you will like this series for its humor, because in my opinion this is like an adult version of Georgia Nicholson in the tone and the style of the humor. I do think as well that the first book in the spin-off series, which is the Montrose Siblings, I think is what it's going to be called, is going to be out this year, fingers crossed. I haven't actually looked into that. It could be like known what the date is and everything. I haven't made my anticipated releases yet, so I don't know for sure, but I will definitely be picking it up because I was hooked on this series and I can't wait to read more from Talia Hibbert. Moving into the top 3, at number 3 we have one that swooped in last minute and completely took me by surprise. I wasn't even planning on reading it. I got it for Christmas and I was struggling with the pacing in the book that I was reading, so I thought I'd pick up something short and something quick just to break it up a little bit so I could go back to that other book. Ended up being number 3 on my favorites of the year, and that is Lore Olympus Volume 1 by Rachel Smith. So this is a bind up of the first part of the webcomic Lore Olympus, which you can read for free on Webtoon if you guys are interested and don't want to invest in the chunky hardback. This is essentially an adult fantasy romance webcomic that is a modernized retelling of Hades and Persephone, but with a whole ton of other Greek gods in here as well. The art style in here is absolutely stunning, as you can probably tell from the cover, but even the inside is gorgeous. I mean, look at Persephone. Isn't she such a peach? There are so many reasons why I love this, but I have to say that the main one is that this is pretty much 400 pages of mutual pining. We are in the origins of this relationship here. I think there's over 200 episodes of this available on Webtoon, and only the first 50 are in here. I think they're way over 200 actually on the Webtoon. I looked it up, but I've forgotten the exact number. But this is the very beginning of the story. So it is them meeting, it is also their relationship with other characters. Some of the gods that we have present in here include Hades' brothers, Zeus and Poseidon. We also have Hera, Demeter, Aphrodite, and Eros, just to name a few. And something that I really enjoyed about this is that it is a modernized retelling, so they have technology and things like that, but they very much keep the base nature of the gods, and it is this like cartoony portrayal of them, but also with a big scoop of like relatability and realness that really brings it into the 21st century. So if you guys like my fantasy romance recommendations, if you have the same taste in fantasy romance as me, would definitely recommend picking this one up. Trigger warnings in here though for sexual assault and domestic abuse, because it is a retelling of Greek myth. It doesn't shy away from those sinister sides, and they are present, and in this one in particular there is a very impactful first-hand account of sexual assault. I'm actually really intrigued at this point, or like all throughout this video actually, if you guys know what my best book of the year is, because I feel like I've been really obvious about it this year, like I always am to be fair. But coming in at number 2, we have the reason why I said that my best books is either 6 or 7, depending on how you look at it, because we have Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, which I love that it does that. Like that just, it makes me real happy. So if we're being hella pedantic about this, because this is 2 paperbacks that make up one story, they're just published in 2 in the UK because they're so big. My favorite one is Oathbringer Part 2, but if you guys are unfamiliar with this, it is the 3rd book in the Stormlight Archive, which is Brandon Sanderson's most expansive and complex series to date, and I believe that it is going to be the series that ties the Cosmere together. This is going to be a 10-book series, which I think is 2 5-book story arcs, and we're only up to book 4. Book 4 has been published. There's still 6 to go. I'm going to be nearly 50 by the time the Stormlight Archive is all out, which is wild. It's hard to describe the series as well, because the first book and the plot of the first book is not actually what the series is about, but I obviously can't tell you what it's actually about because spoilers. It is an adult multi-perspective epic fantasy, and we are following a whole bunch of people in book 1 that are tied to this war between the Alethi kingdom and the Parshendi people. So the Parshendi people aren't human, and the Alethi are from one particular kingdom. The character perspectives that we're following are not all Alethi themselves, but they're all connected to the Alethi side of the war in some way, whether they're related to somebody who's in the army, whether they're a slave of the army, whether they're a general of the army, or they know somebody who loosely knows somebody related to this war. But these 2 people are at war because a few years before the start of this series, Parshendi and the Alethi came together to organize a peace treaty, and the Parshendi orchestrated the assassination of the Alethi king. As I said, the series is in a very different place than where it started out. The plot has thickened, lots of things have been revealed over the 1,000+ page installments of this series. We also have groups of legendary knights, magical blades and armor and all that kind of stuff. You have to experience this series. I will say that the first book in this series is a bit of a drag, especially because you don't have context for a lot of things, so I think that I would actually enjoy Way of Kings a lot more upon reread, because one of the things that I love about this series that's really clever and really interesting is the reason why it is so hard to get through when you're just entering into this series is because it is apparent from our perspective that this is not a normal environment for these people to be in. However, from their perspectives, everything that they're portraying, the world that they live in, is completely normal, so they don't go out of their way to explain things. They don't question the origins of things. Like, if the sky in this world was orange, we would wonder why the sky is orange, because the sky's supposed to be blue. But the characters of this book have always known the sky to be orange, so why would they question that? So it's really fun as a reader to go through this series and try and figure out what's going on when the characters aren't helping you out a whole ton until the equilibrium is disturbed and they start to question things a little bit more. We all know that Sanderson is famous for the Sanderslanch, which is essentially towards the end of a book where everything starts clicking into place and the plot twists just keep coming. But the Sanderslanch in this was so good. I cried multiple times, and not even necessarily because terrible awful things were happening. It was because I was just so happy for some of the characters in some instances. One of my favorite tropes is Deus Ex Machina, or Here Comes the Cavalry, which a lot of people don't like, but I really like that emotional feeling that you get when your heroes are so close to failure and at the last minute somebody comes and saves the day. I'm not saying that this book has that, but it has elements of, you know, when people are just really running out of luck and then somebody shows up for them, like somebody who you didn't think was going to come back and care enough or wasn't going to be able to save the day comes back and like pulls everything together. It had a few of those elements throughout here. We found out a lot about the world, tons of character development, and I'm really excited to read Rhythm of War. I'm just trying to get through the rest of the Cosmere me at first, because I believe book 4 is where we really start to tie some elements together. And even though I know I don't need to read Mistborn Era 2, I would like to just have everything read before I continue in the Stormlight Archive, so I have all of the knowledge that I could possibly need and I won't miss anything. I mean, I probably will, because this series is so expansive, but I want to give myself the best shot of not missing anything. And I feel like there is something very noticeable missing from this stack, so I'm sure it comes to no surprise to absolutely anybody for me to reveal that my favorite book of 2021 is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. This is book 2 in the Red Rising trilogy. That entire trilogy is my favorite thing that I've read this year. I did only give book 1 4 stars because it took me a while to get into it, but when I did, oh my god, I became obsessed, and it has taken everything in me not to continue with the second trilogy because I want a release date for the last one before I do, because the way that Pierce Brown writes these books, I could not be able to cope if the second book in that second trilogy ended on a cliffhanger, and I had no idea how long I would have to wait for the final book. But if you guys are unfamiliar with Red Rising, it is a sci-fi dystopian, so dystopia is a subgenre of sci-fi, but it's a dystopia set in space, so it has like those traditional sci-fi space elements as well. And we're following this guy called Darrow, who is a red. The social system in this world is based on color, so you have reds right at the bottom and you have golds right at the top. And Darrow and the rest of the reds believe that their people are working towards a righteous cause. They are mining a very valuable substance called helium-3, and the reason that they think they're doing it is so that the planets can be terraformed and that people can escape the dying planet Earth and start to colonize the solar system. However, after Darrow's wife makes herself a martyr to spur Darrow into action, he joins a group of rebels and finds out that the planets are all terraformed. There's massive cities on the surface of all of the planets, and Darrow's people are pretty much being kept in slavery. So he joins this rebellion and goes to infiltrate the golds to break the system apart from the inside. There's so much that I love about this series. I love Darrow and I love the evolution of Darrow. I love that Darrow is morally grey in that he will make hard decisions, because when we read about heroes, we don't often read about the hard things they have to do where they have to sacrifice things and sacrifice people in order to further their cause. And I love that in this series we see Darrow do absolutely terrible things for the greater good, and how conflicted he is about it, and how his morality starts to shift when he starts to infiltrate the golds and he realizes that yes, they've been oppressing people this entire time, but individually they're not all bad people. I love the character relationships in here. I love the angst. Cassius, one of my favorite characters, absolutely adore him. Severo is like my actual favorite character because he is just a foul-mouthed little cinnamon roll and I adore him so much. I love the drama in here. This series has a very Shakespearean type of drama where you'll have people just storming up to other people and declaring blood feuds and like fights to the death. The cliffhangers are impeccable. The cliffhanger at the end of this book, like this book has so much action in it, and I normally don't like really action-based books, but it's the level of drama and the level of betrayal in this series that always takes me by surprise. I'm reading these books and I'm just thinking, oh damn, the entire time as people are just betraying each other left, right and center. We also have a whole ton of deaths throughout this series. Pierce Brown isn't afraid to kill his characters, which I really love, and I was blown away. I thought that I would like this going into it because from what I'd heard, it was my kind of thing, you know, like it's a little bit dark, it's a little bit gritty, but there was something about the plot of this that I wasn't really feeling. The first book especially is a lot like the Hunger Games, even to the point where as part of a training program they have an arena type system like the Hunger Games, and also the place where Darrow is from, where all of the Reds live, is very much like District 13 in the Hunger Games. But I was like just not prepared for how obsessed I would be with this series and obsessed with the characters. And yeah, I already want to reread this. I might reread this. I want to read the second trilogy first, but then I can see this being a series that I revisit over and over again. If anybody is curious as well, this is the Fairy Loot edition, and another reason why I'm really glad that I'm obsessed with this series is because I wanted this set for the longest time, but they were out of stock. They sold out really quick from Fairy Loot, and they did one of their past item sales where they sell any stock that they have left, and I managed to snag one, but they weren't cheap and I hadn't read the series at that point. So I'm glad glad that taking a chance on getting these fancy special editions actually paid off, and I'm obsessed, truly obsessed. One of my favorite series of all time, hands down, will be obsessed for the rest of my life. So there you have it. Those are my best books of 2021. I was feeling kind of down about filming this because I just didn't feel like I enjoyed anything a whole ton throughout this year, apart from Oathbringer and Golden Sun were my 100% definite best books of the year, and then it took me a long time to even get to 6 books on this, honestly. But now that I've sat here and spoke to you guys and hyped them up and told you guys all about them and how much I love them, I'm actually feeling so much better at the end of this video than I was when I sat down to film. But here's hoping that 2022 is a better year for me quality wise. I am almost done with my first book of the year, which is a 700-page tome, and I think it's going to be 5 stars, so it's already looking up. We are getting off to a good start. But down in my comments, please let me know what your guys' favorite book of the year is, because I would love to hear about it. And aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.